For attending. It's
Without
good
the
to see you
stable
again.
door being closed.
First question is government's response, that's state and federal, to COVID-19, but I'm focusing on the federal. Government's response to COVID-19 has caused harm to so many Australians, economically, socially, and to their physical and mental health. Adverse reactions, vaccine mandates, the fear of death from provisionally approved injections that haven't been fully tested and that are still experimental has affected our freedoms and way of life. What have you done to audit and to report on the management or mismanagement of Australia's COVID response?
We initiated a series of audits for COVID starting last year. I'll just have to, I can run through them, but basically what we did was we started a program of audits which we broke up into three stages. One, to look at the initial preparation and rollout of a number of COVID initiatives. The second, to look at the implementation phase, and the third, which we haven't commenced yet, to look back and sort of do an overview of how the response was. The first phase of our audits looked at issues such as which were more around the planning side of things. We did an audit of the Services Australia COVID measures and enterprise risk framework, so how Services Australia established its COVID response. One on how the tax office set itself up to implement government programs, and particularly focusing on how it did a risk assessment on that, and a audit on the broader public service response, so how the public service reorganised itself and moved resources around as a whole to meet demand in areas like Service Australia, where there was significant demand on service delivery as a result of COVID. We've undertaken two audits on the procurement and deployment of the National Medical Stockpile. We've undertaken an audit on the international travel restrictions and the effectiveness of the design and implementation of travel restrictions. We've undertaken an audit of the human biosecurity practices at international airports and the effectiveness of those policies. Today we tabled an audit on the administration of the JobKeeper scheme, and we have audits on overseas crisis management and response, so how the government organised to bring people back to Australia, those factors, which is scheduled to tabling later this month, next month, and then another audit on the aviation sector, the government's support for the aviation sector, which is underway, and an audit of the vaccine rollout program, which is underway. So we've had quite a comprehensive audit program with respect to the government's policies on COVID-19, which we've done and have finished and are underway. We've also got some audits on our program relating to issues like debt management, how COVID-19 has affected debt management, the COVID Safe app, and the consumer travel support program. So that's sort of the extent of our work to date in those areas.
Thank you. That's a fairly comprehensive response. Thank you very much. It seems to me, and I'm looking at this remotely, it seems to me that they're about the way programs were implemented, designed, rather than the actual basis of the programs. Is the data underpinning the programs, the evaluation of the injections and the fact that we spent $8 billion plus on them?
We look at the design of programs and their administration. Our role isn't to go to the policy decision as such, so the merits of the policy decision tends to sit outside of the work that we undertake. So
Thank you. It's a pleasure dealing with Mr. Hare because he just tells it as it is. It's refreshing. Second question, the purchase of COVID treatments such as molnupiravir for $300 million to treat just 100,000 Australians seems to have been overly hasty, as we now hear that it may be harmful to humans. Will you investigate the high costs, the processes and accountabilities in relation to treatment approvals?
It's not currently on our program, but as I normally respond, if you think there's an audit topic there that we should look at, I'm happy to consider it if you...
We think there's a huge topic there.
Yeah, but
we'll draft something.
If you draft something and send it to me, we'll have a look at it. As I said to Senator Ayres, we're in the middle of finalising our audit program for next year, and we treat all requests seriously.
Thank you. Are you able to find out whether the Morrison-Joyce government gave AstraZeneca, gave it away, the vaccines away to other countries for use on their people because of the adverse effects it had on Australians?
That's quite a difficult question. If we undertook an audit of that, we could... No, that's a difficult question. It's unlikely that we'd scope an audit to go to, because your question went to motives for a decision, whether it go to motives for a decision. I would have thought that would probably be outside the scope of an audit. We go to the evidence underpinning decisions. Our audits tend to look at the robustness of the advice given by departments to ministers to make decisions, but we'd normally go to questioning them, see the questioning of the motives of decision makers, government, as being outside of our legislative remit.
Okay. Other treatments, such as ivermectin, could have had enormous promise in the treatment of COVID-19, and they have shown enormous impact overseas. They've stopped the virus in its tracks. Yet ivermectin was stopped dead due to bureaucracy and the lack of an approval by the TGA. Can you audit their processes and their responses? Because it includes billions of dollars that could have been avoided had ivermectin been approved here in this country.
We could certainly audit their processes. The challenge for us in technical areas like that is we rarely go to question the merit of their decision because you've got an expert panel who are assessing expert evidence. So, we would rarely get to a place under our auditing standards where we could say we would have made a different decision than them. All we can say is this is the information that was in front of them and the decision that they took. So again, it's a challenging thing for us to audit because it's not usually part of what we would do. The decision would have to be so much at odds with the evidence base for us to make any comment in such a space.
Could you make comment as to whether or not a process for approval is appropriate? My understanding is that someone who wants to get a drug approved has to make application. Fair enough. But it seems that if there's merit in a proven, safe, effective, affordable, accessible treatment, and it's been investigated by doctors in this country and they've come to the conclusion that they need to use this, they're not allowed to. In fact, they were stopped from using it. So are you able to consider those kinds of things? Should the TGA or someone in the health department have got out and said, we need to get this approved. We can't wait for someone to submit an approval, submit an application.
What we tend to audit if we're in that type of space is whether the organisation followed its policy and procedures for making those decisions. So we'd have an expectation that an organisation like the TGA would have a pathway in its normal procedures and for urgent procedures for how it made decisions.
As it does.
And we would normally, in that type of circumstance, undertake, if we were doing an audit in the area, look to see whether the procedures were followed, and if they weren't followed, there was clear evidence for why they took another path. So it would be very much a process type of audit would be the normal type of thing we'd do.
So let me test my understanding then. If there's a policy and a process, you will test adherence to that.
Yep.
If the policy is flawed, we will test adherence to that.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
Yep.
Thank you. That's very clear. COVID management flip-flopped and caused unnecessary concern. Is there any way you can improve, as Anao, future planning, responses and management?
We've made a number of recommendations in the audits that we've undertaken about the government, how government can respond to COVID. I think, in summary, what our audits have generally found is that the response by government agencies to the implementation of policies in the crisis has been quite good. What we've tended to find is that the readiness wasn't what you might have expected. So most of the recommendations that have come out of the audits that I mentioned previously tend to, there's recommendations coming and findings coming out of the audits that I mentioned earlier, which go to how departments could improve their readiness for emergency response, so that they're better prepared. But our audits, I think, overwhelmingly are quite positive with, once the crisis happened, how well the public sector responded in that environment. I think it's been largely, they've almost all been pretty positive from that perspective.
So I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm just checking. So whether or not JobKeeper was implemented, that's not your purview. How it was implemented is your purview.
That's broadly correct. If when the agency is putting it forward in designing the proposal they put to government, didn't have what they put forward was inconsistent with the evidence base that they had in front of them, then we'd comment about the policy advice process to government, but not about the decision, and then we'd go on and look at the implementation. So our focus is on the actions of the department. The policy decision that comes out of that is a matter for government and ministers, and we tend not to go there. Now, there is a hierarchy there. I'm talking about sort of the high-level policy decisions, administrative policy decisions about how you do things. We tend to go to the effectiveness of those.
And if it involves a technical issue with experts on a panel, you're not equipped to handle that because it's outside your area. So you might look at the various submissions and then arrive at whether or not the decision was sound, but generally if it's technical, it's outside your scope.
Unless the evidence is clear that the body didn't take account of the technical advice, like the evidence that they were confronted with was different from their conclusions and they behaved differently in that circumstance, we'd comment on that. But we wouldn't try and remake decisions for people or say that they should have made a different decision. We'd be pointing out the evidence base around it.
Thank you. Can you audit commercial in confidence contracts and report back?
Yes.
You can?
Yes. Most contracts have a clause in them that says that we can access, they're required to have a clause that says that we can access their information, and even if they don't, we can access them.
So how would we go about doing that? Making a request to you?
Just, make a request.
All right. Last question,
What sort
Chair.
of things did you have in mind?
The contracts that taxpayers have been entered into on their behalf by the government with regard to purchasing $8 billion plus worth of vaccines.
Is that in our current order? Okay. Yeah. We're doing the rollout of the vaccines, not the purchase procured at the moment.
Because we have asked for copies of the contract, as have other countries, and we've been told that they're commercial in confidence, can't see them. But $8 billion is a massive transfer of wealth from the taxpayers of this country to pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah. For us to do audits in that space, we come to an issue that that we confront occasionally with the Senate. We might do the audit and find conclusions, but if we, to the extent we don't publish the contract material, we tend not to make it available. And if the government's claiming commercial in confidence or some public interest immunity, we tend not to override that except in this extreme circumstance. But that doesn't stop us from doing the audit, because the audit, an audit of a procurement is a value for money audit, so it's just...
That's what we're getting at.
It's about the level of disclosure that you have.
No, I accept that. They've got to, if the government says it's commercial in confidence, I don't think that's right. But let's say that is correct. Then you will not divulge any of the contract details, but you will assess whether or not it's value and whether or not it was done properly.
Yeah, but generally when we're doing procurement audits, and we tend to use the Senate definition of commercial in confidence to make judgments about the extent to which something is commercial in confidence, which my recollection is goes to the profit margin and things like that as being the core things around commercial in confidence.
Thank you. Last question. This is a question for the Minister because it involves an opinion. If the audits that I've discussed are outside the purview of the Australian National Audit Office, should they go to a Royal Commission? Because Senator Hanson has been calling for a Royal Commission and many Australians are resonating with that.
In terms of the issues you raise, the best... I mean, obviously we have Senate estimates to inquire on these matters, various Senate committee processes. We've just talked about the capacity and scope of the Auditor General. I'm not convinced that the threshold for a Royal Commission has been met. I mean, it's a response to so many things these days, many of them worthy, but they're a huge impost on the taxpayer. And, you know, if there are specific proposals, I'm sure you'll be welcome to put them up ahead of the election, but that's not the intention of the government to do that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you again, Mr Hare. It really is a nice, refreshing change to get direct answers. Thank you.